Welcome back to the 90% Healthy podcast. Today, we wanted to shift the conversation to an important topic that will likely impact all of you at some point of your life, and that's metabolic health. It is the foundation for how our body creates energy from the food we eat. It's key to longevity, to disease prevention, but we have a massive problem. According to the CDC, there's 9 out of 10 Americans who are metabolically unhealthy, meaning their body is inefficient in making energy from the food we eat. There are a lot of underlying issues, and obviously there are upstream effects, which we'll dive into. And it frankly hits really close to home for me, and I will share some of my story. But I wanted to hand the mic over to Dawn because I want you to get our listeners honed in on why is metabolic health important?
Listen, it's an unbelievable question, and you go back to the data. You've already mentioned 9 out of 10 people are metabolically unhealthy, and I think a lot of this goes back to the environment that we live in. That we have a body that we have the genetics that gave us the ability to survive droughts, to survive lack of food, things like that, and and we live in an environment now where there's food 24/7, 365. And not only, and we should be careful here. Michael Pollan in one of his books talks about food like products. Okay. And I think it's important to distinguish between food and food like products. When I was teaching, one of the things I would talk to I would teach nutrition classes.
Hang on a second.
Okay.
I'm gonna edit this. Your microphone is very loud right now. Did you adjust the gain?
Let me see. Is this better?
Yes, it's better. Yeah.
Okay,
It was just really loud.
Okay. Is this good?
Yeah, it's good. And can you? I know you're close. I know for me, I have to be close. But what if you push a little bit away?
What about now?
Okay, much better. Yeah.
Okay.
Yes. Okay, so go back to Mike Pollan. It wasn't terribly disturbing, but I know long term it would have been. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
So I really like one of the quotes that Michael Pollan makes in one of his books about food-like products. So we have access to food, and we have access to food-like products. And back when I was teaching, and I would teach nutrition classes, one of the things that modern nutrition texts focus on is nutritional labels, reading nutritional labels.
Yeah.
But when you go into the store, the truth is food-like products have nutritional labels. Food does not. So if you're in the produce section, or if you're in the deli in the meat section, there aren't nutritional labels. It's grown.
Yeah.
It's food. And I think this is an important thing to look at, to distinguish, first of all. Number one. Number two is recognize the impact of the industry. So the industry has two huge drivers. Number one, we have a Department of Agriculture that is all about helping farmers optimize profits. And we do this best when we raise high carbohydrate grain-like products that have shelf stability for decades. Okay, these foods can sit on the shelf for a long time. Foods without nutritional labels, food doesn't last that long. It's important to start to distinguish between food and food-like products. Number one, our metabolism, our genetically derived metabolism, is not adjusting well to all the food-like products we have access to. And this is one of the challenges. So what are the two things that are most shelf-stable? Carbohydrates, wheat, corn, things like that, and sugar. Incredible. I mean, they'll last for decades. So what do you find in the shelves with nutritional labels? High carbohydrate, high wheat products, high corn products, all combined with sugar to make them more palatable. And we love them. So it's the mismatch that we're dealing with right now. We didn't have this mismatch 5, 6, 7 decades ago. This is relatively new. And this is one of the challenges that we're dealing with.
And I want to add to that, not only are there mix of ingredients that are palatable but insanely unhealthy for us, but it's the abundance of them and its accessibility that we can go to our pantry every 2 hours and have a snack that will constantly increase blood glucose, which as a result will increase insulin. And when
Hmm.
there's insulin circulating in your blood, you're storing fat. It's just how it works.
And
With
you
insulin, there's no
develop
fat loss.
insulin resistance. I mean, when you have
Exactly.
high circulation, that's exactly it. So, and this is one of the challenges. These foods, in and of themselves, I think it's important to say, probably aren't unhealthy. The overconsumption of these foods becomes unhealthy. And this is, so, I mean, listen, if you get someone on here from Quaker Oats or PG or whatever, they're going to say, well, this particular product, if consumed correctly, is a healthy product. And that in and of itself is probably a correct statement. But Pop Tarts, every 2 hours, 10 times a day becomes
Yes.
a problem because of the insulin that's built up and the metabolic instability that comes with that. And this is one of the challenges. If we listen, there's two authors out there that have written great books on this. I love Dr. Peter Attia's book Outlive. He calls the result of this the four horsemen of
Mm.
longevity. I mean, these are the people that are things that are going to take you out. I like Robert Lustig's book, Dr. Robert Lustig's book, Metabolical, does a beautiful job of lining up not only the big picture, what's going on with big medicine, big pharma, big food, but also how does that impact at an individual level with high insulin levels and the dysregulation of your metabolism. Both two great places to go back and refer to.
And just to piggyback on that, I wanted to mention how you said that one Pop Tart will not cause you insulin resistance. And I think that's the important point to make, where people can get obsessed with going one certain way and cutting out all the bad stuff forever. I think if you build up a resilience in your body where you're flexible to sometimes having that cheat meal or cheat day or not going 100% all the time, then your body can handle it and it can bounce back really fast because you built
Absolutely.
that resilience. So I also want to, just so our listeners can paint a picture and perhaps even relate to, what does it look like to have a strong metabolic function, strong metabolic health? And also, what does it look like to have a poor metabolic health? Let's start with
Yeah.
the strong.
So let's move down and what is the ultimate impact of poor nutritional and exercise habits? Well, you develop inflammatory you develop inflammation. You inflame. And this literally starts down inside the cell, inside the part of the cell called the mitochondria. This is the part of the cell that makes energy. And there's a part in the mitochondria, there's a process in there, it's called electron transport. So literally the consumption of these high carbohydrate products, this works its way all the way down into each individual cell. And this is why it's so important. And when we look at this inflammatory response, when we look at longevity and what is going to kill you after the age of 40, it's all inflammatory related. Okay, it's going to be cancer. It's going to be the inability to respond to infections. It's going to be problems with your neural inflammation. These are all things that are going. This is what's going to take you on before 40. Listen, it's going to be playing in traffic. You can't be stupid. You got to do the things that your mom told you. Wear your seatbelts. Wear a helmet. Don't be stupid. Don't play in traffic. And again, listen, if your job is if you like to play in traffic all day, it makes no difference what you're going to eat. You're going to die early because you just can't play Frogger that long.
Yeah.
Do you know what Frogger is?
No, just
Frogger was a great video game back in the 90s where you have to take this frog and jump it across an interstate with trucks coming. So that's one of the challenges. So listen, if you leave a Frogger lifestyle, it makes no difference what you're going to eat. You're going to get killed early. But if you get through that period and you get into your 50s and 60s and 70s, now you have to start to deal with the impact of inflammation. And that inflammation is a result of metabolic disease, which is a combination of overconsumption of super high calorie, super high efficiently digested food, carbohydrates, refined carbohydrates and sugar, and the lack of real food. When we look at real food, and I think it's important to talk about, and I've already done it in this conversation, and I shouldn't do it, but not all carbohydrates are bad. There's carbohydrates that are very good for you. If you're eating natural fruits and vegetables and they're coming with the natural fiber that comes with them, has an incredible impact on blunting the impact of sugar and insulin's response to it. So that's why eating fruits and vegetables vegetables and fruits, I should say, it's more important to consume. But in getting that fiber intake. So when you hear about fiber, and again, eating a spoonful of some kind of a psyllium supplement because you're eating 12 Pop-Tarts a day doesn't solve the problem.
No.
You've got to add the pieces in nutrient dense food, and nutrient dense food comes from natural food. So that's it. The secondary impact is this is going to affect hormones. Most people, when they engage in dieting and exercise, 90% of people, when they say, why are you dieting? Why are you exercising? They're saying, I want to lose weight. Which really means I want to lose fat. And you and I talked about this in our pre-record, that we're going to do an episode on body composition. That's one of the things that's coming up. And again, losing weight is not about calories. Losing weight is about hormones. Okay. And what foods and what exercise does to affect the hormones that cause you to gain and release stored energy. So this is important to pay attention to. So you have the high level, you have the low level, and we come in between with the hormones and hormonal response. That's where metabolic disease lies. And this is the challenge that we have because, again, our environment is stuffed full of highly processed foods, or as Michael Pollan says, highly processed food-like substances.
And all of those things trigger that glucose, bring in that glucose, which will trigger that insulin release from the pancreas. And I just wanted to double click on what it means having higher insulin when it comes to your hormones. And I wanted to share a little bit about my personal experience. I mean, when people look at me like, oh, she's healthy, she's fit, she's constantly and the thing is, it hasn't always been this way. I've always been somewhat fit. I've never been overweight, but that doesn't mean I didn't have insulin resistance. And that is one important point to say, that studies have shown that even though a large percentage of people may have insulin resistance, they don't have to be obese or overweight for that to manifest.
Absolutely.
It shows up in a different way. For me, it showed up as polycystic ovarian syndrome. It showed up having 6 cysts in each of my ovaries and potentially snowballing me down the road of infertility. Now, a lot of women, 1 in 10, deal with this condition. They say it's not curable, but it can be reversible. And me having fixed my insulin resistance, which unfortunately was sort of developed after moving to the States, frankly, the food-like products I kind of started eating. And it was very interesting. Once I dialed back on carbohydrates and prioritized real food and made my metabolic health to be flexible and become more resilient, within 6 months, all of those cysts were gone. And that was looked at through an ultrasound scan. So it was one of those things where this can be done in a relatively short period of time. So there are a couple of different ways, and I'm sorry to steal the conversation for just a second.
No, you're fine.
When I learned about this, it was very eye-opening how insulin resistance can develop a couple of different ways. One is the slow way and the other is the fast way. Fast way I want to start with because you can become somewhat insulin resistant overnight. A bad night of sleep could trigger insulin resistance because your body does not get the restorative time spent sleeping, and you may have increased cortisol, which will also increase the glucose in your blood, which also release more insulin to usher glucose into your cells. And the same thing there are studies have shown that there was a systemic analysis where they were looking at what sleep deprivation does to insulin resistance, and because they showed increased cortisol and increased inflammatory markers like C-reactive protein, and as they are higher, insulin resistance was more likely to develop. And it doesn't have to take months and years. It could take a few nights of bad night's sleep, but it can also reverse that
And
fast.
it's and whether it's correlational or causal, it's immaterial. They go hand in hand. And yes, you're exactly right that when you do have poor sleep, you are more. And we go back to our first episode that we did talking about HRV. So when we look at HRV and its measurement of the autonomic nervous system, and on the autonomic nervous system we have sympathetic and parasympathetic. You have a bad night of sleep, your body says, something's going on here. Let's give them more energy so they can get through their day. So you dump cortisol. Cortisol causes sugars and protein. So we convert proteins in our muscles to sugars.
Yeah.
That happens, and that's. Oh, by the way, at the same time, your body doesn't like being in a state of growth and a state of breakdown at the same time.
No.
When you're taking cortisol, you're in catabolism. You're breaking down. So cortisol blocks testosterone. Okay. So all those great growth factors, they're not even playing the game. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Because your body's in survival mode. So again, this ultimately backs up to stress. Okay. And what's interesting, Klaudia, I'm talking to a couple different companies right now looking at using wearable technology and how that you use this in healthcare. And right now you go into your doctor and they take a blood. Well, first thing you do is they put you on a scale and create a stress event. No one likes stepping on that scale. Then they
No,
take
God,
you
that's the only time I step on a scale. My
and you
doctor.
hate it. I'll tell you, I don't think I've ever told you this story, but when we were doing the very first human performance lab I ever developed, it was back at Columbus State Community College years and years ago. And we have this really cool room. We have underwater weighing, we have treadmills, we have gas analyzers. It's a really cool lab, and we have a scale. So I'm just, I'm checking the box. What do I want in the lab? And the scale was important. So we've got this scale in there. And so we set this lab up, and one of my students grabs me and pulls me aside. And she says, I want you to understand, I effing hate that thing. And whenever I see it, it ruins my day. And I thought, oh my God. Now, I'm an old wrestler. Okay. We were on a scale twice a day, every day, weighing in, weighing out, and it was a means to an end. So that scale is brutal. Okay. That's what we've learned. It's brutal. Number one. But when we take a look at that, back to the doctor's office, they put you on the scale, not ever real, and really there's no good data that comes from that when it comes right down to it. But they get a CPT code to reimburse it. They take your blood pressure. They do these things. No one is saying how much stress is in your life or how do you quantify that. We now have wearable technology that helps us with that. And this is one of the transformations that's coming with healthcare. Going back to, I talked about Dr. Atia's book, Outlive. This is medicine 3.0. This is starting to say, okay, let's look at the stress side of the equation and come backwards instead of looking at the effect cause and moving out. So, and again, this goes hand in hand. Oh, what else happens when you're stressed? Your appetite for high processed food goes off the scale. You
Give me
love
the
that
donut.
stuff. It is
Yeah.
bring me the donuts. That's exactly right. And this is it. And listen, if you're not getting parasympathetic into your game, if you don't have recovery, the drive is real. The drive is dramatic, and it's almost overpowering. Okay,
Yeah.
so this is the challenge. And oh, by the way, what comes from that? Poor 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 immune response. We have an increased cancer risk. We have increased heart disease risk. We have all these things that come in hand with that. Ultimately, that boils back to stress. But again, in the intermediate, you can't separate stress from insulin resistance and all the byproducts that come from that.
100%. And to kind of gear forward in how insulin resistance develops in a slow manner, which I think was the case in my end. It took years for it to develop and PCOS to really come about. Is that snacking culture that we have in this world, and that food-like products, where we unfortunately we wake up in the morning. So we have our. Let me step back for a second. The way insulin works is you eat something, it has glucose in it. Your pancreas releases insulin because your body does not want glucose to be hanging out in your bloodstream.
Right.
Insulin helps push glucose into your muscle tissue, into your fat tissue, and into your liver. Now, when you're sleeping, obviously glucose goes down, insulin goes down. But we wake up in the morning, we have
Or it should.
Or it
Or it
should.
should.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, it should. In a healthy individual. And then you eat in the morning, you have your cereal or white bread or donuts, sugary coffee, glucose goes up, insulin will inadvertently go up. Glucose goes up, insulin goes up, and until glucose is all the way ushered into your tissues, insulin will not subside. And
Yes.
it could take up to 3 to 4 hours for insulin to go down. But what we're told in a lot of cultures today, that you should eat every 3 to 4 hours. It will be great for you. So before your insulin could even go down, you eat another load of carbohydrates, triggering another load of insulin. So that constant chronically elevated insulin could cause your cells to become resistant to it and less sensitive, which will lead to that metabolic inefficiency and fat storage.
Let's back up on that just a second, because I think
There's a
it's
lot to
important.
unpack.
There's a lot there, but so why are they telling people to eat every 2 to 4 hours? Okay, let's say take a look at that.
I was told to keep my metabolism fast.
Right. Well, and again, based on age, based on goals, there's a lot that goes with that. If I've got a young athlete that's trying to gain weight to do what they do, and they're exercising, key point. Okay.
Energy output.
That when the insulin is in the system, it tells the cell, hey, there's resources available. You can go ahead and build. And in the cell is this little protein that's called mTOR. mTOR's job is to tell the cell to be a cell and make proteins. So that mTOR goes into the nucleus of the cell, grabs some little DNA strands, goes to the goes into another organelle in the cell, the ribosome, and it turns that genetic into proteins. Okay, that's really important. Okay, I don't want to minimize that at all. It is really, really important. But we also need the other side of the equation, because when insulin drops, when proteins drop, when IGF drops, the cell then says, oh, we don't have things to build with. Let's go ahead and clean up our house. So in that cell, it starts a process called autophagy. This is a intracellular cleaning process, which, oh, by the way, is highly associated with longevity. Okay. Yes. So as we lower the calorie intake, the sugar intake, as we lower the protein intake, and we increase autophagy, we clean up that cell. Oh, by the way, that clean cell results in less cancer. That clean cell results in better immune function. That clean cell results in improved cognitive performance. All the good things, okay, opposite of that. And oh, what's the best way to clean sugar out of the system? Strength training. Build muscle mass. This is the best way to get insulin and sugar out of the cell. It's strength training, having high muscle mass. One of the problems with aging is we have a muscle wasting that takes place. We have less metabolic material available to clean this out. So it starts to stack up and starts to develop. This is why when we're exercising, it's not about, I get the question, what's more important, cardio or strength? They're both important. Do them both. Okay. There's no separation. But it's managing that mTOR autophagy relationship. Okay. That's part of the middle part of the process. It starts with, okay, let's do our best to manage our stress, get good sleep, so we're not driving the cortisol route.
Yeah.
And I don't want this to sound like it's, oh, this is so freaking easy. Why aren't you doing it, you idiot? That's wrong. Okay, it's absolutely wrong. One of the challenges that we have, Klaudia, is trauma. Okay,
Mm.
in our societies, we are traumatizing really, really effectively. We are creating unrealistic fear responses. We call this, when you have PTSD, post traumatic stress disorder. That's a disordered response to stress, following stress. Where is that from? That comes from trauma. Whether that trauma is poverty, whether that trauma is physical abuse, sexual abuse, whatever, that's trauma. And we have to recognize this is part of what we deal with. Listen, this came very clear to me when I was working with a functional medicine doctor about 20 years ago. The observations he made that I happened to witness were unbelievable. 97% of women who present with chronic fatigue have trauma, some type of abuse, probably sexual abuse in their background. Okay? That's the challenge, okay? Because that's driving the cortisol side of this
Yeah.
equation, and it's driving you to want to eat the donuts, okay? And then you don't feel like exercise, you don't do these things, but when you intentionally engage in the processes, eat real food, and you know what? You know what I'm not going to say in this conversation? I'm not going to say don't eat. I'm
No,
not going to
and
do that.
that's where I want to go
Okay.
next. Let's talk about
Yeah.
how we can fix this.
Yeah.
Yes, because it could lead to type 2 diabetes. I was on track to develop type 2 diabetes.
And it's happened to me. I have to deal with this every day.
And it's reversible.
It's
It
manageable.
just takes time.
It's
Yes.
totally manageable.
Yeah, and it doesn't have to be the long fasts. It doesn't have to be the extreme strict caloric deficit. Why can't I pronounce that word?
That's all right.
There
Yes.
we go. Here we go. Deficit. But you can create sustainable change over time where your body is not shocked with not having enough calories and constantly being hungry. Because then once you do eat, it will just eat up all the calories that you are putting in. So it doesn't create that metabolic flexibility that you want. You want your body
And
to
it feeds the feedback mechanism in a negative way. There's
right.
no
You
doubt
want your
about it.
body to be efficient in swapping back and forth between burning fat for energy and sugar for energy, whichever one is available at any moment. So Don, would you
Let's
dive
touch
into
on that
a
for
little
just a
bit?
second.
Yeah, because there's a lot there.
So you've also got to recognize the fact that we have what's called enzymes. So in order to break down a fat, which is a really, really long chemical equation, okay? When we learned this and taught this, it takes me an entire blackboard to write out the equations for beta oxidation of fat. It's a huge equation. Sugar's easy. Water splits it, you get pyruvate, and boy, you're rolling, okay? Sugar is
Yeah.
really easy. And I use a term, and I like this, it's a little too simplistic for the scientific community, but fat enzymes are lazy. Okay. Fat
Right.
enzymes, they'll sit back. Hey, sugar, if you can do it, go do it. Okay. But you've got to really drive down that sugar consumption, that sugar metabolism. So those fat enzymes have to activate, have to become, and the byproduct of that is really cool stuff. One of the byproducts of fat metabolism is what we call ketones. So you've probably heard of ketosis or ketogenic diets. Well, anytime that you're metabolizing fat, you're ketogenic. Okay, you're making ketones. Ketone bodies, genic, produce. You're doing this, and one of the benefits. So one of the ketone bodies that we love, and one of the best ones to measure, is called beta hydroxybutyrate. This is one of the ketone bodies that's produced from fat metabolism. Well, beta hydroxybutyrate is not only an enzyme for that, but it's an incredible process that you are never sharper than when you've got high levels of beta hydroxybutyrate. I mean, it really, and again, going back to the planeswalker, this person says, I kind of got to get some food in me. I'm hungry. They're out walking and walking and walking. They don't have sugars available. They're metabolizing fat, but boy, they're getting sharp as a tack. Their ability to go get food. So if you're looking at brain fog and things like that, it may be these ketone bodies that are not present because there's so much uh, carbohydrate being consumed in your diet. Those fat enzymes are we're not stimulating, we're not making them go. The other thing that stimulates them is cardiovascular exercise, low level cardiovascular
Zone
exercise, zone
two?
1, 2, 3. Yeah, this is one of the big byproducts that comes with that. You can measure these. There's only one diet that I know of right now that you're processing the diet you can measure, and that's a ketogenic diet.
Yes.
Because we can measure ketone bodies. You can measure them with blood. I can do a finger stick and measure them. There's meters like that. Listen, as a type 2 diabetic, you get tired of finger sticks. It's a pain in the butt. Um, but one of the exciting things is I was down at a keto conference in Austin, Texas last year, and there was a company there with a continuous ketone monitor, like a continuous glucose monitor. This thing you snap on your arm, it's there for 2 weeks. It tells you what your ketone levels are. Really
That's
cool
cool. I've never heard
technology.
of that one.
Yeah, and it's really not production yet, but it's on its way. Um, you can go measure your ketone bodies in your urine. You can go to the drugstore, get ketone sticks. Now you got to pee on your fingers and so forth, so it's kind of a process. Now, the problem with that is you're measuring acetylacetate. Which is not it's not the ketone body you really want. Beta hydroxybutyrate is the one you want.
And that's
So
the one you see in blood?
in blood, yes.
Mm.
Now, the really good thing is that there's a third ketone body, acetone. Um, and you can use a breathalyzer, acetone breathalyzer. There's several on the market. BioSense is the one I've had. And while you're measuring acetone, acetone has a solidly predictable relationship to beta hydroxybutyrate.
Mm.
So what you'll see is a lot of these acetone, they call them ACEs instead of the BHBs. But you just breathe into it. And it's very dependable. And again, if you want to see if your diet's doing what you want to do, if you want to see what your exercise, I really believe that measuring ketones is key to really coming up with a strategy to deal with this metabolic dysfunction.
And frankly, I think most people would benefit from being in ketosis in a cyclical basis. So potentially
Absolutely.
whether it's, 6 weeks or 8 weeks, a couple times a year, a few times a
All
year.
daily. No, you can be in ketosis daily. And you don't have to do long-term fasts to be in ketosis. You can do it with just managing and exercise. Okay. You can get, and again, I think it's important when you're looking, the challenge with fasting, Klaudia, is no one knows how long, how deep, no one knows this. We
Because
don't have an
everybody's
answer for that
different.
question.
I
Everybody,
think everybody's
absolutely.
it'll take you certain like X hours to get into ketosis, while it could take me twice as much time to get into ketosis.
Or half as
It's
much.
so different.
Okay.
Or half as
Or
much.
yeah. So I am one of these very efficient metabolizers. Okay. If I'm one of these people that if I'm not paying close attention, I am insulin resistance. If I'm not paying attention, my sugars are too high, and I've really got to watch it. Now, the zombie apocalypse comes and food becomes rationed. You skinny little shits, you're in trouble. Okay. You highly efficient, those ones that, that walk around with six packs. Okay. You're in trouble. Guys like me with a keg. Okay. We are going to be survivors in that atmosphere, in that environment. So, not that I'm rooting for a zombie apocalypse. But there is a huge genetic difference from person to person.
And it's interesting. People will notice, and personally, I noticed. I used to be the girl who would have my meals scheduled out every 3-4 hours, and I would eat. And if I didn't, I would get that hangry feeling because my blood sugar would drop, and my body wasn't efficient in using fat for ketones, which it had plenty of them to use. And once I was able to dial in my flexibility and really be more efficient in using fat for fuel, I love being in a fasted state or
Yeah.
eating high fat at certain times of my cycle. Obviously, for women, there needs to be smart carbohydrates built in throughout the second half of the
Absolutely.
cycle. But that hangry thing that people talk about is completely gone. I can go for hours. I've done, extended fast, 2-3 days plus a 5-day prolonged fast. So I've done extended fast where my body taps into being completely in ketosis. But even short term, my body is okay if it doesn't have food. In fact, I notice I love recording this podcast in the morning hours or before noon because I love being on here talking
Sharp. You like being
sharp
sharp.
and
Yes.
actually having my mind clear and know where it's going, even though sometimes I can't pronounce a word, but that's just because I'm not American.
That's
So
okay.
it's just one of those things where anybody can benefit from it, and it's really cool that you can track it. I frankly have never tracked it. I've tracked my glucose before with a CGM, but I've never tracked my ketones, which would be something interesting to do.
I'm surprised it's taken so long for the ketone body things to catch up. There are you listen, when you look at treating diabetics, I'm blanking on the group right now that does this, but they have cured diabetes using ketogenic diets.
Hmm.
Okay.
Oh yeah.
And now the research is there. The insurance companies are backing it up. This is all good stuff. And who doesn't like ketogenic diets? Well, maybe companies that sell refined carbohydrates.
Maybe.
They're probably creating some research that says maybe this is bad, or there's some terms that get thrown around inappropriately. What we know is ketogenic diets. It's the only diet that you can measure fat metabolism. Period. End of story. Okay,
Yeah.
that's what's so important. And if you've heard me say it before, humans like scoreboards. We like
Hmm.
to see if we're making progress.
Yeah.
Whether it's Biosense or Keto Mojo or any of these other products. Again, I like the breath tools more than I like this finger stick tools. This is important. But yeah, it makes a lot of sense. It helps you deal with insulin resistance. And again, if I have high insulin levels, my body says store energy, and that's where I gain fat. I only release fat when insulin is low. Okay.
Yeah.
Then the body will start to break this loose and release it. And you're only burning fat when you're producing ketone bodies.
Yeah.
Um, so this is the other side of that that's so important. And again, if this is something you're struggling with, maybe add a little bit of measurement. Again, it's dirt cheap to go to the. I think maybe 30 days is
CVS. Yeah.
$5 or $6.
Yeah.
Um, you got to pee on it and measure it, and you start to get a feeling for it. Gives you feedback, or get something that's a breath analyzer, or go get a Keto Mojo.
You know what I would be interesting to see? I know there are ways to measure ketones and glucose, but I haven't really seen it. And I wonder if there's a way to measure insulin at home. Can you measure your insulin?
No, but the same group that's working on the continuous ketone monitor is working on a continuous insulin monitor.
Yes.
Um,
That's what I
I've
want to
not
look at.
I've not seen it yet. Again, listen, if you're measuring blood sugar, you are so far down the metabolic pathway that you have to get your shit fixed at that point. Okay.
Yeah.
If you're up at the ketone level, you're a little closer. You got a little bit more variation. If we're measuring insulin, we're doing great. And again, I believe that technology is coming. Uh, it'll probably show up in the market first with finger stick insulin, and I'm pretty sure that's out there. Time of day, there's a lot of things that go into qualifying that, but this is the beauty. But let's re-emphasize the fact: the machine runs just like your car. You got to put gasoline or diesel and oil and water and so forth, the key components. For your body, the gasoline is real food.
Mhm.
There's a term I heard: jerf, just eat real food. Remember jerf, just eat real food. um, Add that in. Movement, it's critical that we have movement. When you're just eating real food, it's probably nutrient dense. But if there's a nutrient that's missing, you may need to supplement that,
Mhm.
whether it's NAD or spermidine or something like that, to go ahead, because Unfortunately, industrial produced foods, even if it's real food, may be low in a particular nutrient.
Yeah,
So you
unfortunately.
may need to supplement that up. Sleep, good sleep. Get the sleep so that you're not driving the cortisol side, cortisol blocking all that good stuff. And then finally, get the light in your eyes at the right time. Get rid of the toxic light so we can establish the circadian rhythm so this stuff flows together and I can have my system cranking.
Yeah. So I just want to wrap that up into those pillars: nutrition, sleep, exercise, stress management, and light. These are super, super important for you to dial in different aspects of your life, yet they all influence how your body creates energy and
Yes.
how healthy your metabolic function is. So before we wrap up, I would like to just go give our audience a few actionable takeaways. Those one person shifts that they can do. Let's go with somebody who has never measured anything, never looked at anything, maybe sometimes has brain fog, energy slumps and spikes. So, what would you recommend for them to start doing first? They may be insulin resistant, but they may not have to be overweight, but something is off.
Start to measure movement. Um,
Measure movement.
Listen, and measuring movement is relatively easy. It takes a low technology to measure movement effectively, whether it's a step counter or a watch that's measuring movement or things like, or your phone. Most people have a cell phone that can measure movement. Okay. So you want to start to pay attention. How much do I move every day? Um, and this starts to give you a feeling. If you add walking for 5 minutes, you'll see an impact of that. You'll see that number move. Start measuring movement. Number two, start measuring intensity. If you're going to exercise, put a heart rate monitor on. Again, that same watch may be measuring heart rate as well. Okay. You don't have to create puddles of sweat from your exercise for it to be there. Just move more, raise your intensity a little bit. And we'll do a podcast sometime on the value of the different zones.
Yeah.
But just start to do something. Number three, start to am I eating real food every day? That can be done with just a checkboard on the fridge. I mean, did I eat something real today? Did I, count the number of times you eat something that's a food-like product? Just that. And then the other thing that happens is, again, there's a lot of really good tools. Klaudia, we live in a time where technology is creating food-like substances that are overwhelming us. We're not going to win this fight without some other kind of a contrary technology at an individual level. Okay. And again, if you don't listen, I think an Apple Watch is a great tool to start with.
Oh, yeah.
You and I are kind of freaks in the fact that we want something a little deeper, or, I had before we
I
recorded this
started using
podcast.
Apple Watch too. And then
Yeah.
things just snowballed.
Before we started this podcast, I was on a call with an Olympic athlete. And so the Olympic athlete, I'm having to really sharpen the knife. I mean, we're having to really get down with her to really get her to where she's third in the world championships. She's trying to get to gold medal in the Olympics. I mean, it's very fine changes at that point.
Yeah.
But for her mother or her grandmother, it's not nearly as sharp. We get a lot of progress with simple tools, and this is where I think this is an important part of being successful in our society.
Yeah.
Listen, our society has given us the ability where you and I can record this podcast. You're in Phoenix, Arizona area. Right now, I'm up in the San Francisco area. We're getting together. We're going to edit this. People are going to consume this podcast on their cell phone, on their computer, all over the world. Technology has given us some amazing tools. We also have to use that technology to create a protective environment for us,
Yeah.
so that the rest of it's not just going to roll us over and we're going to die of a heart attack when I just saw a football player friend of mine from Ohio State, that he was a year younger than I was, just passed away with a heart attack.
Oh my
Um,
God. Yeah, the
I
four
I turn
horsemen are taking people left and right.
they are, and they don't have to.
No, they don't. And these are these small, sustainable, simple, often simple changes that will make a big difference over time. And yeah, you mentioned, movement and eating real food. And one thing I would challenge our listeners to is to have a longer fasting window, not necessarily from the last meal and the first meal you have. Keep it, 16 hours. But even when you're awake, have have 3 meals and no snacks. Like, give yourself 5 hours between you ingest and other ingredient, another meal or another snack. Just allow for your insulin to go back down in your body, to start to become familiar what it's like to burn fat for fuel.
And when you eat real food, that's a lot easier. If you're
It's a lot easier.
if you're full of a bunch of food like substances, it's
Yeah.
brutal.
And we talk so much about food-like substances and ingredients. I do want to do a podcast episode on labels and how to read them right and what
Or
to
should you
look
read them?
for. Or should you read them? And
Don't
how
buy food
they're
with labels. Yeah,
manipulating you to get them and lie to you. And
we should. You know what would be fun is if we were in the same city. Let's go to a grocery store and let's walk and let's look at the foods and so forth. That would be kind of fun to do.
next time we go to a conference, we'll
Next time
totally
we'll
do
have to do
this.
that. Okay.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much, everybody, for tuning in. This is the 90% Healthy Podcast. Make sure to subscribe, like, leave us a comment, see how you're doing on your little journey, what 1% shift you're incorporating this week, and shoot us any questions you have.
Yeah, and don't be afraid to reach out to us. If you have questions or things like that, reach out to us. That's why we're here.
That's why we're here. 90% is all you need to be healthy. So let us help you get there. See you soon.
Bye-bye.